On May 17, 1944, at 10:03 a.m., Rechlin Air Base northeast of Berlin hummed with controlled urgency. Oberleutnant Dietrich Müller steadied his breath inside the cockpit of a captured F4U Corsair, Bureau number 02460, shot down over southern France 3 weeks prior. The aircraft's inverted gull wings cast shadows across the concrete apron. Luftwaffe intelligence estimated Allied fighters maintained a 3.2 to 1 kill ratio over German interceptors in recent Mediterranean engagements. This single airframe represented Germany's best chance to understand why. Müller's flight orders, signed by General der Flieger Erhard Milch, allocated exactly 45 minutes for evaluation. The test log lay open on his knee, awaiting numbers. Through his headset came mechanic Hauptmann Klaus Hoffmann's voice. "All systems nominal, Dietrich. Don't exceed manifold pressure limits." Müller toggled the magnetos. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine caught with a thunderous bark that rattled the hangar doors 200 meters away. 45 minutes to decode American air superiority. The Corsair sat in Hangar 7 like an artifact from another war. Its midnight blue paint scheme, Navy standard, absorbed the morning light, filtering through high windows. Müller had arrived at Rechlin on May 14th, 3 days before the scheduled flight, to study every rivet and inspection panel. The aircraft's capture near Marseille had been documented in Luftwaffe intelligence report LL 45844, one F4U damaged by flak during a strafing run, force landed intact, pilot taken prisoner. Transport to Rechlin required 2 railway flak cars and an armed escort. By the time Müller first laid hands on the control column, he had memorized the Corsair's specifications from translated US Navy manuals captured in Tunisia. Empty weight, 8,082 pounds. Maximum speed at altitude, 417 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 30,900 feet, range with drop tanks, 1,015 miles. The numbers meant nothing without understanding how they translated to combat effectiveness. Müller walked the aircraft's perimeter that first morning, notebook in hand. The inverted gull wing configuration struck him immediately, a radical departure from conventional fighter design. Hoffmann, who had overseen the aircraft's ground testing, explained the engineering logic. The bend in the wing allowed a shorter, stronger main landing gear while keeping the massive 13-foot 4-inch Hamilton Standard propeller clear of the runway. Müller ran his fingers along the wing's leading edge, feeling the rivets and panel seams. American construction philosophy differed fundamentally from German precision manufacturing. The Corsair's panels fitted loosely by Luftwaffe standards, with visible gaps at the inspection hatches. Yet intelligence reports indicated the F4U maintained operational readiness rates above 70% in Pacific theater conditions. Simplicity equaled durability. Inside the cockpit, Müller familiarized himself with the layout across 6 hours of ground study. The seat positioned the pilot unusually high, providing exceptional forward visibility despite the long nose. The main instrument panel held 27 gauges and indicators, more than the FW190 he regularly flew. Oil pressure, fuel pressure, manifold pressure, cylinder head temperature, carburetor air temperature, each required monitoring. The control stick felt solid, heavier than German fighters. Rudder pedals demanded more pressure. Hoffmann had warned him. The torque from that engine will surprise you. American pilots trained specifically for the Corsair's handling characteristics. Müller made notes. The throttle quadrant held 4 levers: throttle, propeller pitch, mixture, and intercooler flaps. German pilots operated 3, additional complexity or additional control. On May 16th, Müller attended the final pre-flight briefing in Rechlin's operations building. 6 Luftwaffe engineering officers sat around a table covered with American technical documents and German evaluation forms. Oberst Werner Heinz, Chief of Flight Testing, outlined the mission parameters. We need performance data at 3 altitude bands: sea level, 10,000 feet, and 20,000 feet, maximum rate of climb, turn radius at combat speed, control response in high G maneuvers, stall characteristics, most importantly, find the weakness. The room fell quiet. Everyone understood the subtext. Germany's fighter production struggled to match Allied output. The Me-262 jet program faced delays. The FW-190 and Bf-109, backbone of the Jagdwaffe, were being outclassed. If the Corsair possessed a fatal flaw, poor high-altitude performance, vulnerable fuel system, structural weakness, exploiting it could change engagement tactics across all fronts. Müller studied the translated US Navy pilot notes. One section caught his attention. The F4U-1 exhibits a sharp stall with little warning. Recovery requires immediate forward stick and rudder input. Another passage mentioned visibility issues during carrier approaches, leading to high accident rates among inexperienced pilots. The aircraft had entered service in February 1943 aboard USS Essex, but Marine Corps squadrons, flying from land bases, achieved the most impressive combat records. VMF 124, operating from Guadalcanal, claimed 97 Japanese aircraft destroyed by October 1943, with only 7 F4Us lost. The statistics didn't lie. This aircraft won fights. That evening, Müller walked the flight line alone. The spring air smelled of engine oil and fresh-cut grass from the adjacent fields. Rechlin had been Germany's primary aviation testing facility since 1926, hosting every significant Luftwaffe aircraft before operational deployment. He had flown here dozens of times, evaluating captured Soviet fighters, British bombers, even an early model P-51 Mustang the previous year. But the Corsair represented something different. American industrial capacity had produced over 4,000 F4Us by early 1944, according to intelligence estimates. Production rate approximately 250 aircraft per month across 3 factories. Germany's entire single-engine fighter output barely exceeded 1,000 units monthly. The Corsair wasn't just a good fighter, it was the product of an industrial system Germany couldn't match. Müller needed to find its weakness, not because victory seemed likely, but because survival required every advantage. May 17 arrived with clear skies and light winds from the northwest. Müller woke at 0530 hours, ate a light breakfast of bread and ersatz coffee, and reviewed his flight card one final time. The card listed 23 specific test points, each with prescribed airspeed, altitude, and control inputs. Hoffman and his ground crew had positioned the Corsair on the main runway, nose pointed east toward the morning sun. Müller arrived at the flight line at 0945 hours wearing his standard flight suit and leather jacket. No parachute. Standard practice for test flights from which bailout seemed unlikely to improve survival odds. He carried only the flight card, stopwatch, and a small notebook for immediate observations. Pre-flight inspection took 12 minutes. Müller checked the propeller for damage, examined the landing gear struts, verified control surface movement, and inspected the 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in the wings. The guns had been removed for this test flight, reducing weight by approximately 240 pounds. He climbed the retractable boarding ladder and settled into the cockpit. The seat cushion, original American equipment, felt different from German padding, softer. He strapped in using the 4-point harness, adjusted the rudder pedals, and locked the canopy. Through the curved plexiglass, he saw Hoffman standing near the wing, holding a clipboard. Müller gave the thumbs-up signal. The engine start procedure took 30 seconds. Battery on, fuel selector to main tank. Mixture full rich. Propeller control full forward. Throttle cracked half an inch. Master ignition switch on, magnetos to both. Starter engaged. The 18-cylinder radial coughed twice, then caught with a roar that vibrated through the airframe. Müller monitored the gauges. Oil pressure climbed to 70 pounds per square inch. Manifold pressure stabilized at 30 inches. Cylinder head temperatures rose toward normal operating range. He advanced the throttle slightly, feeling the aircraft strain against the wheel chocks. At 1,000 hours, Hoffman waved the chocks clear. Müller released the tow brakes and began his taxi to the runway's northern threshold. The Corsair accelerated quickly on the ground, tail coming up after just 50 meters. Müller corrected right rudder to counter the massive engine torque. At 105 miles per hour indicated airspeed. He eased back on the stick. The aircraft lifted cleanly, landing gear tucking into the wings with solid mechanical chunks. Altimeter unwinding, 200 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. Rechlin fell away below. The test flight had begun. At 2,000 feet over Brandenburg countryside, Müller began the first evaluation sequence, level flight performance checks. He stabilized at 250 miles per hour indicated airspeed, trimmed for hands-off flight, and noted the power settings. Manifold pressure, 38 inches, RPM, 2,450. The aircraft flew straight and level with minimal control input. He glanced at his stopwatch. 3 minutes elapsed, 42 remaining. According to his flight card, he needed to evaluate cruise performance at 3 power settings before beginning maneuver testing. The engine's sound changed with each throttle adjustment. A deep, resonant growl at high power, a steady drone at cruise settings. American engine design prioritized reliability over peak performance, he noted. The R2800 could run at high power settings for extended periods without overheating. Müller pushed the throttle forward to military power and watched the airspeed indicator climb. 270 miles per hour, 290, 300. The aircraft remained stable, no vibration or flutter in the controls. At 320 miles per hour, he began a gentle climb to 10,000 feet. The rate of climb indicator showed 2,800 feet per minute, better than expected for an aircraft carrying nearly 350 gallons of fuel. The Corsair's climb performance matched its reputation. He leveled off at 10,000 feet and glanced down. The landscape had transformed into a patchwork of green fields and dark forests. Berlin's sprawl was visible 30 kilometers southwest, a grey smudge against the horizon. The radio crackled. Hoffman's voice. "Dietrich, we're reading your telemetry. Engine temperature's normal. How's the handling?" Rechlin's ground station had installed basic radio equipment in the Corsair, though it operated on German frequencies rather than American ones. Müller keyed his microphone. "Stable. Heavier than our fighters, but predictable. Beginning turn evaluation." He rolled into a 30-degree bank to the left, maintaining altitude. The aircraft responded smoothly, though the ailerons required more force than a Bf-109. He tightened the turn to 45 degrees, then 60. G-forces pressed him into the seat. The turn radius tightened. He glanced at the airspeed, bleeding off rapidly. At 180 miles per hour, he felt the first signs of buffet through the control stick. Pre-stall warning. He relaxed the back pressure and rolled wings level. 8 minutes into the flight. Müller wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold air at altitude. The Corsair demanded attention, constant small corrections to maintain precise flight. Yet it felt solid, planted, like an aircraft designed by engineers who understood combat stress. He advanced the throttle again and began a dive to pick up speed for the next test sequence. The dive test revealed the Corsair's true character. Müller pushed the nose down 15 degrees and watched the airspeed indicator accelerate past 350 miles per hour. The controls grew heavier, requiring both hands on the stick. At 400 miles per hour, the aircraft remained rock steady. No wing flutter, no control reversal, no structural complaints. German intelligence had reported that F4Us regularly dove at speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour during combat engagements, using their weight and power to escape or pursue. Müller pulled back on the stick at 410 miles per hour, feeling perhaps 4 Gs compress his body into the seat. The Corsair transitioned from dive to level flight without hesitation. Altitude 7,500 feet. He had lost 2,500 feet in the dive. The maneuver took 40 seconds. He leveled off and checked his instruments. All readings normal. The engine's steady rumble continued without interruption. Müller made notes on his knee pad. Excellent dive performance. No structural limits apparent up to 410 mph IAS. Controls remain effective throughout speed range. The American design philosophy became clearer. The Corsair wasn't built for dogfighting. It was built for hit-and-run tactics. Dive on the enemy, use superior speed and firepower, extend away before the adversary could respond. The tactics matched the machine. German fighters, particularly the Bf-109, excelled in turning combat. The Corsair excelled in vertical maneuvers and energy management, different doctrines, different solutions. Müller climbed back to 10,000 feet and began roll rate testing. He snapped the stick left, applying full aileron deflection. The Corsair rolled quickly for its size, completing 360 degrees in approximately 4 seconds. Not as fast as the FW-190's roll rate, but faster than expected for an aircraft weighing nearly 9,000 pounds empty. He reversed the roll, testing coordination between aileron and rudder inputs. The aircraft responded predictably, though the rudder pedals required significant leg pressure. Another note: adequate roll rate. Heavy controls require physical strength during sustained maneuvering. American pilots were generally larger than their German counterparts, he recalled. The design accommodated that reality. 20 minutes elapsed. Müller had completed half his test card and used half his allotted time. The Corsair had performed flawlessly across all evaluations. He needed to push harder, test the limits where weaknesses emerged. He throttled back to 200 miles per hour and began slow flight testing. The aircraft mushed slightly, losing altitude even with the stick held neutral. He added power and raised the nose. The buffet intensified. At 110 miles per hour, the left wing dropped suddenly. Stall. Müller pushed the stick forward and applied right rudder. The Corsair recovered within 300 feet, nose dropping below the horizon, before airspeed increased enough for controlled flight. The stall characteristics were indeed sharp, as the American pilot notes had warned, but recoverable if the pilot reacted immediately. At 25 minutes into the flight, Müller climbed to 20,000 feet for high-altitude evaluation. The air grew thin and cold, frost forming on the inside of the canopy plexiglass. He adjusted the oxygen regulator and tested the heater system. Lukewarm air flowed from the vents, adequate but not impressive. At altitude, the Corsair's performance remained strong. Maximum speed, approximately 380 miles per hour indicated. Rate of climb, still above 2,000 feet per minute. The supercharger maintained manifold pressure without protest. Müller flew a series of lazy eights, figure-eight maneuvers that tested coordination and control harmony. The aircraft flowed through the sky with grace unusual for its size and weight. From 20,000 feet, Müller could see the Oder River winding northeast and the Baltic coast as a hazy line on the horizon. The visibility seemed limitless. A pilot's dream. He rolled inverted and pulled through to a split S maneuver, trading altitude for speed. The nose pointed straight down. Airspeed climbed through 300, 350, 400 miles per hour. At 15,000 feet, Müller pulled back, feeling 6 Gs compress his vision to a narrow tunnel. The G-suit he wore, standard German equipment, inflated around his legs and abdomen, preventing blood from pooling in his lower body. The Corsair groaned under the load but held together. Recovery altitude, 12,000 feet, 8,000 feet lost in the maneuver. Hoffmann's voice crackled through the headset. "Dietrich, you're burning through altitude quickly. 17 minutes remaining." Müller keyed his microphone. "Understood. The aircraft handles everything I give it. No structural concerns, no control issues. It's impressive." He heard Hoffmann's sigh through the radio static. That wasn't the answer the Luftwaffe wanted to hear. They needed weaknesses, vulnerabilities, some flaw to exploit. But Müller couldn't fabricate deficiencies that didn't exist. The Corsair was simply well-engineered, a product of American industrial resources and design experience. He descended to 8,000 feet and began combat maneuver simulation. He imagined an enemy fighter approaching from the rear quarter, then executed a hard brake turn to the left. The Corsair snapped around, wings vertical to the earth. The turn radius tightened as airspeed bled off. At 150 miles per hour, buffet vibrated through the airframe. Müller rolled out, added power, and climbed away. The maneuver was defensive, designed to overshoot an attacking fighter, effective if executed properly. He tried the same sequence to the right with similar results. The aircraft turned equally well in both directions, no adverse handling characteristics. Another note, no asymmetric tendencies, predictable in all flight regimes tested. 30 minutes elapsed, 15 remaining. Müller had completed 19 of 23 test points. The final evaluations involved formation, flying characteristics, and low-altitude performance. He descended toward Rechlin, throttling back to approach speed. Below 5,000 feet, the details of the landscape sharpened. Müller identified roads, farm buildings, and the distinctive rectangular outline of Rechlin's 3 runways. He flew a wide pattern around the airfield, maintaining 3,000 feet and 180 miles per hour. The Corsair's visibility surprised him. The high seating position and bubble canopy provided excellent situational awareness. German fighters, particularly the Bf-109 with its narrow canopy and restricted side vision, couldn't match this field of view. In combat, seeing the enemy first meant living longer. The Americans understood that principle and designed accordingly. Müller dropped to 1,000 feet and began low-altitude handling tests. He flew at 250 miles per hour, 50 meters above the treetops, feeling the ground effect slightly lift the aircraft. The ride was smooth, the engine steady. He pulled up into a climbing turn, then rolled inverted briefly before rolling back upright. Each maneuver confirmed his growing assessment. The F4U Corsair was a thoroughly competent fighter aircraft with no significant weaknesses. It wasn't perfect. The heavy controls, sharp stall, and carrier landing difficulties documented in American records were real, but those were training issues, not fundamental design flaws. A skilled pilot could manage them, and skilled pilots, given enough flight time, learn to exploit an aircraft's strengths while minimizing its limitations. The radio crackled. "Dietrich, 10 minutes remaining. Begin your return to base." Müller acknowledged and climbed back to 2,000 feet. He flew a rectangular pattern parallel to the main runway, checking landing gear operation. The main wheels extended smoothly, locked indicators showing green. The tail wheel dropped and locked. He configured flaps to approach setting. 20 degrees. Airspeed, 140 miles per hour. The aircraft felt stable on final approach. No adverse pitch changes or control difficulties. He crossed the runway threshold at 110 miles per hour and closed the throttle. The main wheels touched first, then the tail wheel. Rollout distance, approximately 400 meters. He taxied clear of the runway and shut down the engine at 10:45 hours. Hoffman and his crew surrounded the aircraft immediately. Müller unstrapped and climbed down the boarding ladder, legs slightly unsteady from 45 minutes of sustained concentration. Hoffman handed him a canteen of water. "Well?" Müller drank deeply, then met his friend's eyes. "It's everything the intelligence reports claimed. Solid, fast, powerful, no weaknesses I could identify in the time available." He saw the disappointment on Hoffman's face. The ground crew had spent weeks preparing the aircraft, hoping the test flight would reveal some tactical advantage for Luftwaffe pilots facing Corsairs in combat. Instead, they had confirmation that American industry had produced a world-class fighter that Germany couldn't currently match in performance or numbers. Inside Rechlin's operations building, Müller sat at a metal table and began drafting his formal evaluation report. The format was standard: aircraft identification, test conditions, performance data, handling characteristics, conclusions, and recommendations. His hands moved across the page mechanically, translating flight experience into technical language. F4U Corsair, Bureau number 02460, evaluated on 17th May 1944 under clear weather conditions at Rechlin Test Center. Aircraft weight approximately 11,500 pounds including fuel. Test duration 45 minutes. Altitude range sea level to 20,000 feet. The opening paragraphs established context, then came the data. Maximum level speed at 2,000 feet, approximately 335 miles per hour. Maximum level speed at 20,000 feet, approximately 380 miles per hour. These figures matched American performance charts within measurement error. Müller continued writing. Rate of climb at sea level, 2,800 feet per minute. Service ceiling, above 35,000 feet. Not tested due to time constraints. Turn radius at 250 McLSP indicated, approximately 1,500 meters. Roll rate at 250 Mach, 90 degrees per second. Each number represented a specific test point, a maneuver flown, data collected. But numbers alone didn't capture the aircraft's essential character. He added a narrative section. The F4U demonstrates excellent overall performance with no significant deficiencies identified. The aircraft is stable throughout its flight envelope, with predictable handling characteristics and adequate control harmony. Stall behavior is sharp but recoverable with proper technique. The inverted gull-wing design provides structural efficiency and accommodates a large diameter propeller while maintaining reasonable landing gear length. He paused, considering his next words carefully. This section would reach senior Luftwaffe commanders, men responsible for deciding how to counter this aircraft in combat. Tactical recommendations had the F4U excels in hit-and-run engagements, utilizing its superior dive speed and climb rate. German fighters should avoid prolonged turning combat with the Corsair, as its energy retention and structural strength allow sustained, high-G maneuvering. Best countermeasures include surprise attacks from superior altitude, exploitation of the Corsair's relatively poor visibility during turning engagements, and engagement at close range where German fighters' superior roll rates provide advantages in scissors maneuvers. However, the Corsair's overall performance envelope is superior to current Luftwaffe single-engine fighters in most flight regimes. That last sentence felt like defeat. Müller crossed it out, then wrote it again. Truth mattered more than morale. Oberst Heinz entered the room and read over Müller's shoulder. After a long silence, Heinz spoke. "This report will not be welcome in Berlin." Müller continued writing. "I can only report what I observed, Herr Oberst. "The Americans have built an excellent fighter." Heinz nodded slowly. "Submit your report by 1800 hours. I'll forward it through channels." The Corsair evaluation report reached Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's headquarters on May 22, 1944, along with 17 other technical assessments compiled that week. Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, reviewed the document in his office at Karenhall. His aide noted that the Reichsmarschall spent 4 minutes reading Müller's conclusions before throwing the folder across the room. "Another American aircraft we cannot match," he reportedly said. "Where are our jet fighters? Where is the Me-262 production?" The frustration was understandable. By late May 1944, Allied air superiority over Western Europe had become nearly absolute. The Normandy invasion was 3 weeks away, though German intelligence hadn't yet confirmed the exact timing. Müller's report circulated among Luftwaffe tactical units operating in Italy and France, where encounters with F4U Corsairs were becoming more frequent. Fighter pilots read his recommendations with grim acknowledgement. Jagdgeschwader 53, based near Rome, had lost 4 Bf-109s to Marine Corps F4Us in April during attacks on ground positions. The German pilots reported that Corsairs attacked in high-speed diving passes, expended their ammunition, and climbed away before German fighters could intercept. The tactic was devastatingly effective. Müller's flight test data confirmed what combat pilots already knew. The Corsair could dictate engagement terms through superior performance. Meanwhile, the captured F4U-1 remained at Rechlin for additional testing. Engineers removed the wings and examined the internal structure. They discovered that the main wing spar, a massive beam running from root to tip, used a continuous piece of aluminum alloy measuring more than 12 meters long. German manufacturing practice typically spliced wing spars from multiple sections to conserve high-grade alloys, which were increasingly scarce. The American approach sacrificed material efficiency for structural strength. The trade-off made sense given America's industrial capacity. Germany couldn't afford such luxury. Rechlin's chief engineer, Dr. Heinrich Vogt, wrote in his evaluation, "The F4U represents a design philosophy fundamentally different from our own. American aircraft emphasize ruggedness and ease of manufacture over performance optimization. The result is an aircraft that performs well across a broad envelope rather than excelling in a specific regime. For their purposes, equipping a massive air force with reliable equipment, the approach succeeds." In June 1944, as Allied forces stormed the Normandy beaches, Marine Fighter Squadron VMF-13 began operating from newly captured airfields in southern France. Flying F4U-1 Corsairs, the squadron flew 340 combat sorties during June and July, claiming 62 German aircraft destroyed against 4 Corsairs lost. The kill ratio, 15.5 to 1, represented one of the most lopsided combat records of the war. Müller's test flight had predicted such outcomes. The Corsairs' performance advantages, combined with growing Allied numerical superiority, created conditions German fighters couldn't overcome. By August 1944, Müller had returned to operational flying, assigned to Jagdgeschwader 2, defending Berlin against bomber formations. He flew a FW-190A8, an aircraft he knew intimately after hundreds of hours in type. On August 14th, his unit intercepted a formation of B-17s escorted by P-51 Mustangs. During the engagement, Müller damaged 1 bomber before disengaging due to low fuel. The mission report noted heavy enemy fighter presence and overwhelming Allied numbers. German fighter pilots were being ground down through attrition, losing experienced aircrew faster than training programs could replace them. Müller survived that mission and 3 dozen more through autumn 1944. He never encountered F4U Corsairs in combat. The type operated primarily in the Mediterranean, Pacific, and later in support of ground operations following the Normandy invasion. German fighters faced Mustangs, Thunderbolts and Spitfires over Germany itself. But the Corsair represented something larger than its specific combat role. It symbolized American industrial capacity and engineering competence. The United States produced 12,571 F4U Corsairs between 1942 and 1945, more than the Luftwaffe's total single-engine fighter production during the same period. The numbers told the story of the war more accurately than any tactical analysis. In November 1944, Müller received orders to report to the Me-262 jet fighter training program at Lechfeld Air Base. The Luftwaffe was finally deploying its jet fighters operationally, hoping advanced technology might offset Allied numerical superiority. Müller transitioned to the Me-262A1A and flew his first jet combat mission on December 8, 1944. The experience was surreal, flying at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, attacking bomber formations before their escorts could react, then escaping using sheer velocity. The Me-262 could have changed the air war if deployed in sufficient numbers 2 years earlier. By late 1944, it arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter strategically. On January 15, 1945, Müller's Me-260 was damaged by ground fire during a strafing attack near Bonn. He made an emergency landing at a forward airstrip and waited 3 days for repair parts that never arrived. The German logistics system was collapsing under Allied bombing and fuel shortages. He returned to Berlin by train and reported for reassignment. The Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as an organized fighting force. Pilots without aircraft waited for orders that no longer came. In his small apartment near Tempelhof Airfield, Müller kept his notes from the Corsair evaluation flight 9 months earlier. The test seemed like ancient history, from a time when Germany still believed technical analysis might alter the war's trajectory. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Exactly 356 days after Müller's test flight of the captured Corsair. He surrendered to American forces near Magdeburg and spent 6 weeks in a temporary prisoner of war facility. During interrogation, American intelligence officers questioned him about German aircraft development, operational tactics, and combat experience. When they learned he had test-flown a captured F4U-1, they brought him a copy of the U.S. Navy's Standard Aircraft Characteristics Chart for the Corsair. Müller compared the American performance figures to his own measurements from May 17, 1944. His numbers had been remarkably accurate, within 5% across most parameters. The American officer conducting the interrogation, a Navy lieutenant named James Harrison, seemed impressed. "You're a good test pilot," Harrison said. "Too bad we were on opposite sides." Müller was released from custody in July 1945 and returned to Berlin, now occupied by Soviet forces. The city was unrecognizable, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, infrastructure destroyed, population traumatized. He found work as a mechanic, using his engineering knowledge to repair civilian vehicles. In 1947, he emigrated to Canada, sponsored by a distant relative in Toronto. He never flew again. The trauma of combat, the loss of comrades, and the guilt of serving a criminal regime made aviation unbearable. He worked as a machinist in a manufacturing plant for 32 years, retiring in 1979. He rarely spoke about the war. In 1983, an aviation historian researching Luftwaffe test programs discovered Müller's evaluation report in captured German archives. The historian, Dr. Robert Carson, located Müller in Toronto and requested an interview. Müller, now 68 years old, agreed reluctantly. Carson recorded their conversation on April 12, 1983. Müller spoke for 3 hours about his aviation career, his time at Rechlin, and the Corsair test flight. Carson asked the obvious question: if Germany had copied the Corsair's design, could it have changed the war? Müller's answer was immediate. No, the Corsair was a good aircraft, but it wasn't a miracle. What made it effective was the system behind it: American industry, training programs, logistics, and most importantly, numbers. Germany couldn't replicate that system. We lost the war because we couldn't match Allied production. The test flight taught me that lesson clearly. Carson asked if Müller had any regrets about his wartime service. I regret serving evil men for evil purposes, Müller replied, but I don't regret the flying. I was a test pilot doing my job as accurately as I could. The Corsair was a fine aircraft. I reported that honestly. What the Luftwaffe did with my report, or didn't do, wasn't my responsibility. The F4U Corsair remained in American military service until 1965, longer than any other piston-engine fighter aircraft. It served in World War II, Korea, and various smaller conflicts, accumulating a combat record that validated Müller's assessment from his 45-minute test flight. Total production reached 12,571 aircraft across multiple variants. The type achieved an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 11.3 to 1 in aerial combat, one of the highest of any fighter aircraft in history. Marine Corps squadrons flying Corsairs destroyed 2,140 enemy aircraft between 1943 and 1945, while losing 189 F4Us to all causes in air-to-air combat. The numbers confirmed what Müller had intuited. The Corsair was a survivor, built for the attritional reality of modern warfare. Müller's evaluation report, declassified in 1972, became a minor footnote in aviation history. Historians noted its accuracy and objectivity, rare qualities in Luftwaffe technical assessments during the war's final years. The report demonstrated that German engineers understood exactly what they faced, even if the industrial and strategic situation prevented effective countermeasures. Dr. Carson published portions of Müller's report in his 1987 book, Captured Wings: Enemy Aircraft Evaluation in World War II. The book included 3 pages analyzing Müller's test methodology and conclusions. Carson wrote, Müller's assessment stands as a model of professional objectivity under difficult circumstances. He reported facts rather than wishful thinking, providing his superiors with accurate intelligence despite knowing such honesty would be unwelcome. The specific Corsair that Müller flew, Bureau number 02460, remained at Rechlin until April 1945, when Soviet forces captured the airfield. Soviet engineers examined the aircraft but found it too damaged from Allied bombing to warrant repair or transportation to the Soviet Union. The Corsair was scrapped in place, cut apart for metal salvage. No photographs of the aircraft at Rechlin are known to survive. Its existence in German hands is documented only through Müller's report and Rechlin's test logs, preserved in captured archives. The pilot who originally flew that aircraft, Marine First Lieutenant Robert M. Hansen, survived the war and returned to the United States. He never knew a German test pilot had flown his shot-down aircraft. Müller died in Toronto on February 19, 1995, at age 80. His obituary in the Toronto Star made no mention of his aviation career or wartime service. He was remembered as a skilled machinist and quiet neighbor. Among his personal effects, his family found a wooden box containing his Luftwaffe pilot's logbook, several photographs, and a typed carbon copy of his Corsair evaluation report. His daughter donated these materials to the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa, where they remain in the archives. Researchers occasionally request access to the documents. The report's final paragraph still resonates. The F4U Corsair represents the current state of American fighter design. It is a formidable opponent that should be respected by all Luftwaffe pilots. No fundamental weaknesses were identified during this evaluation. In the decades following the war, aviation historians debated whether earlier deployment of German jet fighters might have altered the war's outcome. The consensus conclusion mirrors Müller's assessment to Dr. Carson. Technology alone couldn't overcome systemic disadvantages in production capacity, pilot training, and strategic resources. The Corsair test flight illustrated this reality in miniature. Müller identified a superior aircraft, reported his findings accurately, but Germany possessed neither the industrial capacity to replicate the design nor the tactical situation to exploit the knowledge gained. The test flight's value lay in its documentation of reality, not in strategic advantages provided. The broader lesson concerned the relationship between technology and industrial capacity. American aircraft designers in the early 1940s created machines that could be manufactured at scale using available materials and unskilled labor. The Corsair's loose-fitting panels and simplified construction reflected this philosophy. German designers pursued aerodynamic perfection and performance optimization, creating technically superior aircraft that required skilled craftsmen and scarce materials. Both approaches succeeded within their respective contexts. The difference was scale. America could afford inefficiency. Germany couldn't. Modern flight testing still references Müller's methodology. His systematic approach to performance evaluation, sequential testing of flight regimes, careful documentation, objective reporting, established standards that remain relevant. When the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum restored an F4U 1D Corsair to flying condition in 2015, the test pilot conducting the post-restoration evaluation flight used a test card nearly identical in structure to Müller's 1944 checklist. The aircraft behaved exactly as Müller had described 71 years earlier, confirming his observations through independent verification. The captured Corsair's story represents one small thread in the vast tapestry of World War II's aerial war. Thousands of similar evaluations occurred on all sides, as engineers and test pilots worked to understand enemy capabilities. Most such tests left no lasting legacy beyond file folders in archives. Müller's report endures because of its honesty and technical precision. He could have written a politically convenient assessment, emphasizing weaknesses and downplaying strengths. Instead, he documented what he observed and let the facts speak. That choice honors the test pilot's fundamental obligation, truth in service of safety and understanding, regardless of consequences. The final archival note comes from Rechlin's flight log for May 17, 1944. The entry reads, F4U1, Buno, 2460, test pilot, Oberleutnant D. Müller, duration, 45 minutes, evaluation, complete, aircraft performance exceeds expectations, no significant deficiencies noted, recommend detailed study of American design practices. Below that entry, someone, likely Oberst Heinz, added a handwritten annotation in blue pencil. Noted and forwarded. Findings confirm intelligence assessments. No further action was taken. The war continued. The Corsair flew on, and the test pilot's words remained in the archives, a small testament to honesty in a time of lies.